wow, this is so cool. Like, moose, that's a big one.
When you allow the horses to live in the environment that's designed for them, and you allow that environment to be much more suitable for the horse than what the current equestrian sector as a whole has, you start to see how happy and healthy they can be. I've just received some funding, £5,000 worth of funding to actually help improve the environment of my land. Because a lot of the charities and kind of councils and water boards and things like that, they recognise that how horses are kept is damaging the rest of our environment.
Hello.
Hello. Chaos from the outset. How are you doing?
I'm good. Slight chaos this week, but good. We had the physio for Harley today, so that was good. I'm about to travel for work for a couple of days, so that's fun. It's all going on.
Nice.
How are you?
Yeah, busy. It's also busy. Yeah, we had a shoot today. I'm wearing my Jelka outfit. I've been talking about Jelka over the last few episodes, haven't I? And just really cool. Like, they're such a passionate company. Jelka are the people who've supplied me with rubber matting, water drinkers, and the leveler for our arena. And like, there was just actual care that has gone into it. Like Jared was saying, the guy, he's the son of that him and his dad kind of co-own the company. And he was just talking about how like he got into the doing it. Like, he used to work with cows, and he was like, oh, we look after cows really well. Like, we really care how we look after them. Why aren't we doing the same for horses? And he was saying, you know, horses don't, he said himself, this guy doesn't ride. He said, we asked him, has he ridden? And he said, twice. And I was like, well, the answer is no then. You don't really ride. Like, it's a funny thing that people do, and they're like, do you ride? And they're like, yeah, well, twice. He said, we have a duty of care to the horses in our care, because they don't choose to live with us. So we have to be like raising the bar, and that's what I really feel that they're doing. They're offering amazing products. So it was a really cool day to hear a bit about the science. We called it Getting Geeky with Jared, because he can tell you a lot of very interesting, if you're interested in it, information about like rubber matting. I had no idea some of the facts that he came out with, but it was cool. It was great. You said you had a physio today.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what's the updates?
I will. Just an aside on that. I really love meeting business owners who've like founded companies, because to your point, the level of detail that they've had to unwrap on not just their own product, but like the most random stuff. Like, there should be a content series of like random things I had to learn as a business owner, because you'd be surprised the rabbit holes people have to go down for their passion, and I just love that.
100%.
So to catch you up, Harley has been doing in-hand work since sort of the end of April. I thought he wasn't 100%, had a couple of subtle things that happened, and my physio came and was like, yes, he's a bit sore, unusual, he's not normally like this, and he's not normally unhappy, maybe he's done something in the field, we weren't sure. So he's been having 10 days of just in-hand stuff, which has actually been very fun. Every other day, on the weekends, you know, my partner and I walked him in hand. We went out for a walk together for like an hour, and it was just like really nice. And it was really fun, and I think it's really good for Harley as well, like to do this stuff with us on the ground. It was just lovely, and we were eating. Harley was eating lots of cow parsley and sticky weed and all the fun things. So that was really cool. Anyway, she came back today, and I sort of was looking at him yesterday, and I was like, I've just got to stop looking at you, because every time I look at you, I'm like, is that a shorter step? Is that happening? What is your eyebrow doing? And he's like, I think I'm okay. Anyway, she came and lunged him for her, and it was interesting because when he started on the right rein again, he looked to me a little shorter in his step. He's quite a expressive horse, and he just looked a little bit shorter, and she agreed, and we put him on the left rein, and he did turn into me once, but it was much less pronounced. It was sort of like, maybe we don't trot on the left rein. And I was like, can you show Kate? Can you show the physio? And he was like, okay. And he like did his trot and canter on the left rein, and she was like, let me see him again on the right. And we put him back on the right rein, and this time he'd really freed up, and actually he offered canter, and she was like, oh, that's really interesting. She said at the beginning I was like, oh, it's still there a bit, but actually by the time he'd warmed up a little bit, she said it was almost imperceptible. So 90% there. She's like much better, which I was relieved by, because I was a bit like, oh, what does this mean? Mm-hmm. So he's going to have a couple of days off, as he always does after the physio, and then she would like us to do 50% kind of in hand, 50% ridden, really slow, really easy, little bit of suppling, but lots of kind of bringing him back into work gently, and then she's going to come back in 2 weeks. So that feels really good. I have no grand ambitions to do anything in particular at the moment, and so it's just nice to hang out with him. And it's so sweet when she treats him, because Harley is quite a funny horse in that, like, he has his people and he's quite, I don't know, he's almost shy with new people. Like when Mandy first came, the new saddler, the first time she kind of met him, he was like a little bit kind of closed off to her. And I was like, he will warm up to you. I was like, you've just got to give him a couple of sessions. Mm-hmm. And now he's like, oh, hello, Mandy, my friend, my new friend. Aww. And with our physio, Kate, he just like loves her. And his little face when she was treating him, she said it was really different. And she's treated him since I bought him, actually. So she knows him really well. And so that was just lovely. I just love watching their facial expressions when they're treated with cool people who knew how to do cool things, because he just looked so content and like, oh yes, that's really nice. And it was nice.
Nice. Oh, that sounds really positive and like you're going in the right direction. And I guess if you then reintroduce ridden stuff, then maybe you then back off again, and then that's when you can maybe, escalate things. It was interesting, though, that you said that you would do 50% ridden work and 50% from the ground. Would you say that you would do a more percentage of ridden work?
Yeah, so the physio recommended, she was like, don't go completely back to doing ridden, which is actually an interesting thing, because I guess in your world, you're like, well, I'd never do 100% ridden anyway.
Well, that's why I said it.
Yeah, really good point, actually. I would say it's probably, if I'm honest, it's probably like a 70-30, maybe 80-20, like 80% ridden, and then occasionally I'll take him for an in-hand walk, more so recently, or I'll long line, or I'll do a bit of groundwork. But it's not built into my system in the way that I would like build in a schooling session.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? It was just food for thought. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because obviously he's growing and changing, and I wonder if this sort of interlude that you've had may be like, oh, actually, maybe I should do more from the ground. Like,
definitely
more poles, like what Gillian was talking about, like setting him up for doing the job you want him to do for the ridden work from the ground. Food for thought. I think as well,
absolutely.
I absolutely learnt at my old yard where my arena was just woefully not what it needed to be. I think I really learnt the power of doing things from the ground. Like, I knew the power of it, but I was forced to do it more than I would ride, because riding in that arena made it, the horses just found it hard, so I didn't do it very much. Whereas now that I've got this beautiful new arena, which is just, I can't even begin to tell you, I want everyone to come and try it, so they can understand the importance of good groundwork. They can understand the importance of the surface, of the arena leveler, like all of these things. It is really important. We are asking our horses to do really hard things. And like when I ride Zora, because last time I said I didn't feel like I was getting it right.
Yeah.
I rode her today with the Jelka people, and I was like, look, I'm just going to go on, see how she feels. And she was there like, I'm fine. And I'm like, yeah, okay, can you do this? She was like, yes, I can do that. I was like, okay, what about that? Yes, I can do that. It was clearly obvious. She was like up for it, keen, confident, used the whole arena, round every corner, supple, soft. I was like, okay, I'll ride you a bit more again. Because, I can get a bit in my own head about it and be a bit like, oh no, or convince myself that I shouldn't be doing it. But I think that is because I know how it can feel to ride a horse that isn't feeling good, but also that I know the importance of doing things from the ground. And speaking of that, I released my first video this week with Mia.
Oh yeah. Oh wait. This isn't the 30-day challenge. This is your YouTube series.
Yeah. It's complicated, isn't it?
Sorry, I got excited.
Recording
I am excited anyway, but
we're recording this a week before it's going out, actually. So actually there'll have been 2 videos. So if you're interested in what Mia and I got up to, there's 2 whole videos on my YouTube channel about it.
It does.
But it was interesting. It was honestly just, really powerful. And Mia's just like an oracle, and her and I together, it was a really cool thing, because we were both like, I found this, and she's like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, and she'd say something, and I'd be like, yeah. It was like these 2 kindred spirits, but it was so nice because I rewatched the video to edit it, Ellie, who also edits this podcast, edits my YouTube for me because I don't have enough hours in the day. But I have to rewatch the videos, so I almost get to experience them like a viewer, which is really quite cool. And like, I was so re-inspired again by it. Like, so I went this week and I've done a load of Liberty stuff, and like actually on the day with Mia, we didn't do any Liberty stuff with Zora, we did bridleless. And so like I did some practicing yesterday with Zora, and I sent some of the videos to Mia, and Mia was like, well, I'm gonna have to send you some more exercises to do. Oh, it's just like this whole new learning. And you and I are both going to the British bridleless competition, aren't we?
Yes.
Not to compete, at the end of May. I'm going to be judging the style and performance show jumping, and you're going to be an arena steward, aren't you?
Yes, I am. I'm going to be stewarding, I think, the warm-up, but like, we'll see. I'm just happy to be wherever
Yeah,
they
I genuinely think your job might be harder than mine. But no, you have to ride in a bridle in the warm-up anyway. So it's not like just people careering around, crashing into each other.
Yeah.
Imagine. Free range.
I do feel a sense of responsibility. Mia said this on the podcast where she was like, we have insurance and we have sponsors, and if we get this wrong, if something goes wrong, even if it's not our fault, like they will never let us do this again. So I do feel a sense of responsibility as part of that team to like really help them get it right and make sure that everything is, and I'm sure the competitors do too, like no one's coming into this resting on their laurels, as it were.
No, absolutely. And they will be resting on their very good training. And I think that's what's really important. You know, it has been so interesting re-riding Zora in a bridle, having now been able to ride her without, because it feels a bit like I've kind of re-enlivened something in her. She's kind of like, I don't know, opened another door of kind of energetically. Like, I think Zora would be a type, she would be classed as very trainable. And I actually think that very trainable can mean you could put them in a box and you could tell them to just keep doing the hard thing and they would just keep doing it. Because I don't know where that came from in her. Obviously with me, she's never had that sort of under the thumb kind of approach.
Yeah.
But it is inbuilt in her. I think she would have made a good high-level dressage horse actually in a professional environment, because she enjoys work, she gets on with it. But yeah, she's a workhorse. But I think there is an element of shutdown that happens for her, and you can see it. She can kind of go a bit like not there. There have been times when I've had certain training with certain people and I've thought, I don't know if I love this. It doesn't really feel like it's for her. Whereas doing the stuff bridleless, it feels like such a kind of communion between you and the horse, because, well, if they don't want to do it, they won't. They'll just go the other direction or not stay with you or not listen to your seat or whatever. So I'm really excited about this kind of new chapter that I'm opening with my horses, which is cool.
I think it's so special, and I encourage anyone to like, not to anthropomorphize them, but to feel in your gut the feeling that your horse gives you. Like, what do they say? Because, you know, the way that Zora communicates with you that makes you feel really cool about bridleless. I was also rewatching a vlog. It was a fun ride we did. It was the first one I've done this year because I was clipping it up for social. And I was just like, had such a smile on my face because it was like a GoPro video, but like this horse, like if all he ever did for the rest of his life was fun rides, he would just like be like living his best life. Like he just loves it, and he's so sweet and lovely, and he's just like, I feel as though whenever I canter on the back of Harley, he's like whispering to my 10-year-old self, just being like, are you ready? I'm going to look after you, and you can just breathe and smile because it's fun. We're gonna have fun. And he's just so cute, and like he makes me want to, like, I was walking along with him in hand the other day and I was like, when we start riding again, maybe we just do some stuff where we like go for a picnic, or I just like ride bareback. And I'm not saying unprepared. I'm just saying like the stuff I would have done with my share horse when I was like 16 or something, because he just gives me that energy. And I just think that's so special, and we should follow that feeling.
100%. 100%. I had some time, because I said, didn't I, before, that I didn't feel like Blondie was feeling 100%. Maybe I was some time of my hormonal cycle where I was doing very down in the dumps about my horses. Either way, Blondie is more complicated, and we changed the way we trimmed her recently slightly, and I think it has changed the way her feet feel, because she's been like standing differently in her stable, and this is the trouble. You start watching, you can't stop.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I really wanted to do was just hang out with her. So I went and I did some spending time with her, because she struggles to have body work from everybody. Like she's not a body work by anybody kind of girl. And so I wanted to do some with her, just being there, touching her body, working out where she feels good, where she doesn't, all the rest of it. So I went with my light therapy, I went with my balance pads, and I went for a right woo session. And I put I was just feeling her shoulders, and I felt, my shoulders are a bit tight. And so I did some body work on her shoulders. And she's quite quick to be like, don't do that. And I'm like, I'm going to help. I'm just going to stay here really gently. Can I help you? So we did that, and she did some releasing and yawning and resting. And then I got the light therapy, and I put it on her knees, because I was just feeling like down her leg, and she kind of looked at me like, oh, what are you doing, when I went near her knees. And Fanula, who is my amazing myofascial release osteopath witch lady, she's just incredible. Like, I wish she could come once a week. She's got lots of other clients, so I can't get her all the time. I know you can't have her number, she's too busy. I mean the podcast. You could, Brie, if she'd travel to you, I'd encourage it. Anyway, I digress. She often says that Blondie has tight knees. Now, whether this is because Blondie has side bone, various other things, I don't know the cause.
That's so random. I would never even think of like a horse's knees being tight. Like that's, yeah, how funny.
And so I put her the LTS hock boots, the light therapy hock boots, on her knees backwards as such, so like on the fronts of her knees. And then I don't know why I did it at the time, but I went and put one of the balance pads on her right hind, so she's standing with front knees LTS, hind
Like
leg.
a 11-year-old skater with her little knee pads.
Literally. with her hind leg up on a balance pad, and then I just went and sat on the floor in front of her, and she stayed there for ages. And then she just came out, she like moved her head, and she put her head down, and she put her head in my lap, and she rested her head on my forehead, like my forehead on her forehead. And then I just had a little cry.
Oh.
And weirdly,
Good cry though.
yeah, it was a good cry, and it was weird, it didn't have a thought to it. It was literally just like a welling of emotion, and so I just had a little cry, and then she licked me for a while, and then I don't know what happened after that actually, but it was just like you're saying, like, do what feels good, like go and hang out with your horse, and don't do what somebody tells you have to do. You don't have to achieve anything with your horse if you don't want to, and I know you can want to achieve things with your horse, that's okay too, but if you don't want to go to a show, you don't have to do that. If you do just want to take your horse out for a big walk like a big dog, that's okay. It's legal.
It's way more fun than you think it is, I promise you. It's actually really, really fun.
I love it so much. There's a really cool bridle path near our yard. It's actually like a public highway, I think it says on the sign, interestingly. I think you could drive down it if you could fit. But there's a tree down at the moment, so you can walk a horse under it. You wouldn't be able to ride under it. So, yeah, it's lovely. It's magic. It feels magic. It feels like, yeah, exploring. Yeah. I definitely want to talk about something, and I didn't know whether you had something else that you wanted to talk about before we have our guest on.
No, you go. Go ahead.
I did a talk at Windsor.
Oh my God, you did! How was it?
Yeah, it was terrifying. So Ellie came with me, is my social media person, edits this podcast, edits my YouTube. Big, crucial role in social media when it comes to the podcast and Hack It Equine. And I got invited, and I had invited you, but you couldn't come because you were working. So Ellie came, and in fact wanted both of you to come. When you listen to this, Ellie, it was a on-par conversation. Anyway, regardless, I just wanted to make sure that nobody felt like they were being left out. Anyway, we went, and we were like walking around to start with to like suss out the joint, see where things were. And it was in the Talk Horse tent, which is another podcast that Pippa Funnel does. And I was like, before, when we went last year, the Talk Horse tent was like really far away, wasn't it? It was like over in like a food court in the other side. Mate, it was right in the middle. They'd moved it.
Perfect. So good.
Yeah, I absolutely nearly shit a brick though at that moment, because I was like, oh my goodness, there is a lot of people here, like a lot of people. So I was quite nervous straight away, like heart rate, dun, 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 dun. But fine, we did some walking around, we came back, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I wasn't sick, so that was great.
That was good.
And I did this talk, and I talked about my whole horse approach. So, like, thinking about everything with our horses, basically all of what we talk about on the podcast, like all of these different people that come on and talk about all of these different facets of how we do things: nervous system regulation, posture, feed, management, how we keep them, how they live with their friends, all of those different things. And it was cool. Like, the audience was like nodding along with me, which always feels like a good thing. And the girl who like conducted the interview as such, because it was going to be just me talking, but then I actually said, oh, actually, is there somebody to kind of be there to kind of lead it? Because,
Yes.
goodness, I would have needed a screen if it was just a
Yeah.
talk. She asked great questions, and it was really cool. And it was, I don't know how many people there were in the tent. I don't know. I'm going to under-egg it and say 30. But it was great. And like, people asked some really cool questions after, and yeah, it was really good. The only thing that maybe that came out of it wasn't so good was, once I got started, I felt fine. Like, I was talking and my heart rate went back down again. But my nervous system wasn't fine. My neck turned red. And if this gets clipped up for whatever reason, it was a really interesting thing. My neck turned red, but in two patches, not my whole neck, not the front of it, just the sides.
Stress rash. Yeah.
Yeah, stress rash. Yeah. Ellie said to me afterwards, she was like, how are you feeling? I was like, fine. She was like, your neck is very red. I was like, oh, okay. It was really weird. And I've had a few messages about it. Apparently it's called something called dermographia. But it is to do with your nervous system being basically frazzled. So I definitely am still fairly frazzled. I'm just not, it's not sort of impacting me day to day as much as it was before. Like, I don't feel anxious all of the time, but it is a real reminder. Like, I am still absolutely on the brink of burnout all the time, and I need to handle everything differently, like change my capacity.
But also how funny that your brain and your body felt like two different things. And also just a reminder, like, of what a big deal that is. Number one, public speaking is really hard for like so many people. And number two, thinking back to when you did your natural horsemanship demo, like, didn't you throw up like twice before that? And
At least.
Yeah, I mean, this was hugely different. So this is mega.
Yeah, big step in the right direction. And you know, it gave me confidence that I can do these sort of hard things. And it's, you know, I am really proud of myself. I guess it's just like, I'm really proud of myself, and also I need to continually look after myself, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was quite something. We had a fun day. We made a funny video that will go out on Instagram at some point, or maybe will have already gone out on Instagram. So, yeah, it was lovely. It was good, and just an honour to be invited. And actually, Windsor is a cool place. They're really trying to do a lot more about sustainability and, you know, being more forward thinking and that kind of thing. So, yeah,
It's good. Good vibes. Our podcast guests today are from Knepp. Knepp. Knepp is this absolutely magical rewilding project in West Sussex. And one of the things that really drew Miri and I to wanting to talk to them, aside from their incredible sort of sustainability and rewilding credentials, is their ponies. They have a herd of around 30 endangered Exmoor ponies that roam free on their land, and they use their unique grazing habits to help maintain the diverse vegetation mosaics and promote biodiversity. Miri, I know you had a little bit of a deeper dig into our guests, so what are you most excited to talk to them about?
Well, Rina is a large herbivore rewilding specialist. So she isn't just about ponies. She knows how to introduce other large herbivores like water buffalo, for example, and bison, that kind of an animal. I don't actually know if they have which other large herbivore they have at Knepp, but it's very clever. You know, it's all on purpose what they're doing, and I'm so passionate about this. Actually, it's funny, a little sidebar, we've got quite a bad weed problem on the farm at the moment. Like, we've got this giant, it's not giant hogweed, it's hogweed, which isn't poisonous, but it's like everywhere. And what it does is these weeds basically spread on like high nitrogen and low like ground like there's no grass cover or anything on the land. It's where all around the house where everything got really destroyed. Nettles are going wild. And I had this really cool conversation with somebody at Windsor actually about what that means, like what the earth is telling you in these moments when certain things grow. And so George got some advice from somebody and they were like, oh yeah, you've got to spray it all. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to put chemicals everywhere. We've got chickens, the dogs, the horses, the wildlife, the birds, the bees, the insects. Like, I don't want to be doing that. I want to educate myself better. And actually, with the help a little bit of AI, which was my best source of information in that very moment, it wasn't the right thing to do. Spraying actually would be not the right thing to do. It's a case of kind of cutting things back to stop seed and then giving the ground, the earth, what it actually needs. And so this whole way of thinking about things is so exciting. And it's a real shame because Ree's actually not going to be able to be there for this conversation, which is a real pity because she's got to go away for work. So it's going to be me wrangling things through this conversation. But well, I hope I do it justice because I am very excited about this conversation for personal reasons, but also for the wider understanding of this. Like, people always talk about horses being very high impact on land, and I do think that they can be, but these guys have introduced horses on purpose. So maybe there are some things that we're going to be able to learn from Rina and from the magic that they are doing at Knepp to understand how our horses can maybe help the environments they live in, not just destroy them.
100%. And also, what a privilege that I get to listen to it as a listener, like for the first time as well. So I'm really excited to hear it too. And yeah, I look forward to it. I'd like to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors of our podcast, Westgate Labs. Whether your horse is a happy hacker, a youngster, or competing at the top level, good parasite control should be an essential part of their well-being. And Westgate Labs are the leaders in this field. Sustainable, targeted parasite control supports health, performance and condition, whilst also helping to protect your grazing and the wider herd.
Regular testing allows you to make informed decisions and avoid unnecessary treatments, protecting both the horse and the effectiveness of wormers for the future. Getting this right is one of the simplest ways to support long-term horse health. Testing is quick, simple and backed by friendly expert support to help you make informed decisions with confidence.
Use the discount code EQLIFE10 for 10% off Westgate test kits, apart from Equicel and subscription plans, and get the results you can trust with their award-winning follow-up advice to help protect your horse. That's EQLIFE10 for 10% off Westgate test kits. All right, back to the podcast.
Hi Rina, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited for this conversation. I have been following Knepp and what they've been doing for a very long time, and I've watched the documentary. I'm a super fan. But Rina, can you, so obviously this is an equestrian podcast, so can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the kind of work that you're doing? Yeah, give us a bit of a picture as to why we've invited you on today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am sort of first and foremost a rewilding consultant and researcher. So I spend most of my time, I run a full-time consultancy which offers advice to landowners, and that's sort of the specialism that I have kind of been developing is in large herbivores, so including obviously horses and their use in nature recovery projects. I am currently doing a part-time PhD around my consultancy and my horses and children and various other things. And that's in the actual introduction of two of our megafauna herbivores, which are bison and elk, commonly known as moose, into Britain. So that's a slight detour from the horse side, but it's very relevant in terms of how we can coexist with these big animals.
My eyes, if you guys can't see me right now, but my eyes are like, I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Like, wow, moose, that's a big one. That
really
because we do have some bison in the UK already, because I went to somewhere else, I can't remember where it was. I went on holiday with my parents to a hotel where they have a small rewilding and they had bison. That was cool.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, there's some cool projects starting. We've got a couple now in Kent and Cumbria that have got bison introductions, which is very exciting. And there's more to come on that. And I think probably what I'll get in really early is that one of my sort of strong beliefs in what I do is about having a diverse herbivore assemblage. It's quite geeky words there, but effectively having in our environment, it would have been much more in the past, and obviously we can go into this, but in the past it would have been much more like a European savanna, like Africa has, with lots of big, large animals, and the way that nature interacts with them. And that's why we use horses in nature recovery projects, as a relic to what we had in the past with horses who would have been here across Europe, basically in Eurasia.
And Rina, how did you get into this?
A very long, convoluted journey, I would say. I actually started out initially, I've always been a horsey girl ever since, I was very young. I didn't have horsey parents or anything, but I did the traditional riding schools and then working and sharing ponies and working at livery yards and dealers and things like that. One of my first main jobs out of school was at a race course, and I worked in the sort of commercial team there. And then I went on and I was marketing manager for Horse and Hound for a while. So a very horsey job.
Yeah, very.
I also worked, my most recent role in corporate land, which was about, over 10 years ago now, was actually running a horsey concierge service, so an equestrian concierge service in London. And it was a members club, and I was manager of that. But it was around, I think, 2012 that I started to really sort of rethink my career. I'd been in the equestrian industry for about 10 years at that point, and effectively kind of just found myself really wanting to do something different. And I went on a horse riding safari in Africa in 2012, and it really just blew up my world. I'd always wanted to be a biologist. I'd always wanted to work with animals. As part of my love of horses was to do with that. And the horseback safari was just eye-opening. And I really realised at the time that our biggest focus right now is to recover nature and to think about having a sort of resilient planet. That's something that's really, really important to me. So I went back to school. I started doing a part-time environmental science degree with the Open University, and did lots of volunteering, did lots of courses and learning, and spending time travelling around. And in that time, rewilding was kind of coming out as a kind of strategy for some of this nature recovery, and it just completely blew up in my world. I just really found myself lit up by this and how exciting it was. And so I left the corporate world, and I started to work in the environmental sector, and just basically built up my experience. Training as an ecologist, and part of my sort of story is I kind of actually fell out of love with horses, if I'm honest. I kind of had this, I think, having worked in the equestrian sector and kind of being very much seeing that side of it, the very commercial side, a lot of the competition world, lots of things, that I didn't perhaps sort of do as myself as a rider, in the worlds of sort of hunting and dressage and show jumping, all that sort of thing, like working in that sector. I kind of found myself like, I'm just going to have a break from it. And I still had an old retired horse, he was semi-retired at the time, horse who was out on grass livery. So he sort of kept my toe in a bit, and, was still sort of thinking about horses. But started working for the Knepp estate, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I just suddenly, completely and utterly fell in love with these free roaming herbivores, and particularly the horses. And I found myself so drawn to them, learning everything I could, and really just trying to see if that was the path I could take, basically, within the nature recovery sector. There's obviously, it's a huge sector, and there's so much that you can do and so many good people working in it. But I really felt drawn to the large herbivores, and also species reintroductions as well. So so that's what drew me to the horses in rewilding.
Wow, gosh, what a journey. And amazing that you kind of kept the horses there, but they were in the background, and then they've become more passionate, but in a different way. That's really amazing. And I've just taken on this amazing farm, and I'm there in my head. How can I help this place be more nurtured by the horses rather than damaged by the horses, essentially. And as a whole thing, I'm just constantly evolving. I've kind of initially set up the kind of standardized fields, and I'm then thinking, do I need to change the way that I'm keeping them? And well, maybe this is part of a wider conversation, Rina, for you to come and pay me a visit. But at this point, could you tell us a bit about Knepp?
Yeah.
Because this was how we got in touch. Knepp is like a huge inspiration for, I think, a lot of people, and they are making a lot of very positive noise around, what rewilding is and what nature used to look like. I saw this amazing graphic, and if you guys don't follow Knepp on social media, you absolutely should. Knepp. You can just type it in, you'll find it, I promise. And this amazing graphic of like what places used to look like and it was computer generated, but like, these herbivores moving around, and then the waterways that just naturally have been so broken up by industry, essentially roads and buildings and all the rest of it. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit, a summarized history of what Knepp is, why it's so magical, and what they're trying to do there?
Yeah, it is such a special place, and I know I'm probably a bit biased, having been there nearly 10 years now, but it's essentially it's a 3,500 acre estate in the heart of Sussex, very near Gatwick, almost down to the coast, not far away from the coast of sort of Worthing, Brighton, that sort of area. So really busy, built up area. And it was traditionally an arable and dairy farm. So they had about 2,000 acres dedicated to arable farming, and about a herd of 600 dairy cattle. And when the estate was inherited and taken over by the current owners, Sir Charlie Burrell and Isabella Tree, Charlie he was the age of 21 to inherit a 3,500 acre estate, and he had just come out of agricultural college and had some really really sort of ideas about kind of how he was going to transform the farming operations there, how he was going to improve it for farming, increase yields, make more profit. He thought that his grandparents who had previously, one of his kind of thoughts at the time was just that they weren't being innovative enough, they weren't using modern technology, things like fertilizers, machinery, technology in it, and that's why they weren't potentially making as much as they could from the farming. But after 17 years of trying to farm in a kind of that sort of way, fairly intensive as they could be, they only made profit in 2 of those years. And I think he was able to sort of go, okay, even with the best technology, the machinery, even with this kind of thought process, we're still not working here. And the main thing really it comes down to is they sit on over 300 metres of clay, thick, heavy Sussex clay. It is like welly stealing mud in the winter, and then it bakes hard in whatever shape it's been left in the summer. So, really difficult to get machinery and really difficult to farm. So they were always fighting against nature. And Charlie had a sort of quite an amazing upbringing, in Africa and Australia and places where he'd seen nature firsthand. And he came across this idea of rewilding. There's a sort of eminent ecologist called Frans Vera, who is Dutch. And he was publishing around the same time, it was sort of late 90s, this thesis, which was basically forest history and grazing ecology. And in this thesis, they looked at all the evidence. He looked at all the evidence, basically, of what we had in the past and what our ecosystems would have looked like. And there's a general idea that it was a really thick, closed canopy across Europe. Squirrels could have jumped from John O'Groats to Land's End without even, sort of jumped across on trees without even touching the ground. And this was kind of that idea. And what he found was actually that was really impossible, because what we're finding is fossils of big, large herbivores like you get in Africa, but more of a temperate kind of mix, which included things like horses. And of course, we know they're predominantly grazers. So if they were surviving, where would they have been and how would they have done that? But even things like he was observing geese, and how geese act in the land and how they can actually halt off succession of vegetation. So effectively what Frans had come against is this constant kind of interplay between herbivores and plants and the rest of the environment as well, how they disturb the landscape and kind of make it very heterogenic, like a mosaic kind of landscape, as opposed to this monoculture sort of trees, woodlands, which we've been led to believe. And so Knepp came about from Charlie's meetings with people who, like Frans Vera. There was an amazing ancient tree specialist as well who had come to Knepp and introduced him to this idea called Ted Green, and Jill Butler as well. These really amazing people that were were wanting to have a project of this scale in Britain. And Charlie and Izzy just went with it. So they basically ceased farming. This was around 2002. And they gradually bought the different parcels. It split into southern, middle and northern blocks. And they gradually bought them out of farming, started to perimeter fence each of those blocks, and then they introduced a suite of herbivores in each of them. Each was different, so it's allowed some sort of control and learning as well across the sites. That's been really interesting. But this southern block of Knepp is probably the one that gets the biggest headlines, and that was the one that was allowed to go really wild. So effectively the vegetation had about 5 years to recover before bigger herbivores came in, and then they were able to fence it, and they introduced species like cattle, horses, red deer, and domesticated pigs as well. There was already roe deer there, and they also introduced the fallow deer. So we sort of call these our kind of big five, if you like, six if you include the roe deer as well. And they all do lots of different things. So that's one of the reasons that they were all introduced. And the main part of it is particularly the domesticated species, so the pigs, the horses and the cattle, they're all acting as what we call proxies for the species that we had in the past. So in the past we would have had the Eurasian wild horse, we would have had the aurochs, which is the wild cattle, and we would have had the boar as well. And actually in some parts of England and Scotland, we're really lucky to still have boar in the landscape.
Is there a perimeter fence then around Knepp? So to stop this all spreading out into everywhere else, because I guess not everybody is choosing to have free roaming pigs on their land. Is there a perimeter fence at some point?
Yeah, so you've got each of the different blocks are roughly different sizes, but about 1,000 acres each. So the southern block is about 1,100 acres, and it's got perimeter fence around there. Okay. So the animals cannot move through that into the landscape. And we're completely surrounded by roads. So we're busy Sussex, and there's dual carriageway right next to the project. So that's kind of essential from that point of view.
And I suppose this is important because it's important to understand that there will be a degree of rewilding that everybody in theory could do, and I'm talking a real degree, like could be really small things to just improve biodiversity potentially, no matter how small your parcel of land is. Because if you guys are putting a fence up around Knepp, whether it's 1,000 acres or 10 acres, there is a degree of stopping that spread throughout the whole of the UK, obviously, because we can't rewild everything. But it's so interesting to understand that concept, and that's why I asked that question, because I was like, okay, well, there is still a boundary. Like, we are rewilding things within a space, and that's such a powerful message, I think, because, okay, no, we don't all have 1,000 acres, but we probably, if we are listening and we have got horses and we maybe have control of our own, I'm thinking for myself, I'm feeling very inspired by this knowing of the fence, basically, because I can't just stop the farmer next door doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I can potentially really look after the land that I am the keeper of. So can you tell us, I'm trying to try and keep it fairly chronological through the conversation, because I can see myself getting very kind of side questy. But in terms of the horses on Knepp, can you said that they are behaving as proxy for a animal that was previously here, as in the Eurasian horse. Do they behave quite similarly? Do they have kind of similar grazing behaviours? Can you talk to me about grazing behaviour, actually?
Yeah, so there's been a fantastic study out a few years ago which looked at the genetic differences between the wild horse and the bulk of our domesticated horses today. And a caveat with that is there's some that have been, in most recent years, very modified in terms of their breeding. But if you look at the sort of general, so much of our native breeds of horses, such as the Exmoor pony that we use at Knepp today, the only two main sort of modified genes from that wild horse is a stronger lumbar region of the back. So that makes sense because as domestication took place, they would have wanted to have horses that were strong for warfare, for farm work, to be able to carry riders. And also their aggression, because that was reduced. So again, if you're working with horses, as we well know, you're going to want horses that have reduced aggression. What that makes the most amazing thing is everything else is pretty much identical. And actually there's some new work going out by Dr. Debbie Davey that's going to be coming out soon to look at some of this. She's done her a PhD on the genetics of Exmoors, and like how close they are to that horse, that almost they could be recognised as that species still. Like it's a very convoluted kind of thing to say that this is now a horse and that was a wild horse. And we know that from countless times that we've seen it. So you've got horses in Venezuela, in Namibia, that are dealing with things like in Namibia, like with hyena and wild dog, and then you've got like pumas in Venezuela and things like that. And these horses are just rewilding themselves. And we know around the world we have lots of wild horses that have really adapted to their environment incredibly well. It's also why I always, laugh in a way. It's why, your horse will spook at a plastic bag, because it's constantly thinking about its, predator and prey interactions and what its environment needs to tell it. So, they're going to be keeping an eye out at all times. They haven't kind of lost that sort of risk of, they're not, still as risk averse as they were before. But from a sort of dentition, their sort of physiology, how their digestive system works, all of that is still pretty much identical to those wild horses. So when you talk about their use in nature recovery, and I don't really actually like the word. There's a lot of, like, with the nature recovery movement, using these animals as tools and saying we've introduced them to do this job. I love, and what I'm trying to work on more, is this idea of they belong as part of the ecosystem, and they are part of that native fauna that we had. And actually the way you see other species interact with them, it just gives you so much evidence for that. So we've seen things, we have an amazing white stork introduction project at Knepp, and we've seen things like these storks that can't possibly know anything about these horses. They've been picking up dung, taking it into their nests and lining their nests with it, probably because it's quite a dry, fibrous dung. And the same way as like elephant dung gets used, it's like, they're using it to just kind of keep their nests nice and tidy and clean and have like a new carpet, basically. Storks are disgusting. They sort of regurgitate their food into their youngsters, sort of down into the nest, and the youngsters kind of pick at it. And so there's always, lots of gross things left. So having a nice new horse dung carpet is great. We see so many interactions with them in the vegetation, in how they're eating, how they're browsing, and that kind of evolution for a horse. It's been 20 million years in the making. Horses started out as sort of small little forest dwellers, and over time they've become much more like the grazing animal that we've seen. And it's just incredible when you see them. And just going back to that question about what, or the sort of that thought about what can we do in our land. I guess what I've been seeing is that it's just a win-win-win all round. So when you allow the horses to live in the environment that's designed for them, and you allow that environment to be much more suitable for the horse than what the current equestrian sector as a whole has, that kind of very standard clean paddock, that is monoculture of a little bit of short grass. When you see what they like and what they interact with the vegetation, and how many sort of features they like in the landscape in terms of things like trees to rub against, shade, water, bare ground, all of this stuff, you start to see how happy and healthy they can be. And it's just, if you can start to introduce that into your land, then you're going to have healthier horses. They're much happier. If they're in social herds like they are in the wild, that is just absolutely fantastic for them. They're not designed as an individual animal. They're a herd animal. So there's just so much we can learn from these observations of them, like at Knepp, where they're just able to do their own thing, and we can sort of observe that. And I rent 10 acres of my own land, actually on the Knepp estate. It's just adjacent. And so that's something that I'm always endeavouring to do, is to try and create a mini habitat for them that can offer them everything they need on a daily basis. They live out, they don't get stabled or anything like that. So
I just think this is so important, the part about evolution, about we treat our horses like they are this totally, well, not me personally actually, but a lot of the time in my current sporting positions, horses are treated like they are different to their ancestors. And like you're saying, no, they've got stronger backs and they have less aggression. That's it. Yeah, of course, they look different. They've got longer legs, and, the modern sport horse does. But fundamentally, they are the same on the inside. Yeah. Their digestion, their biome, all of these same things are still the same species as they were. They haven't changed species. I think that's almost like, we treat the sport horse like it is a different species to an Exmoor pony, and it isn't. No. They just have a different body.
Yeah, and it's actually something I've learned the most. So I've got 3 horses. I lost my my old horse last year. He was nearly 28, and I'd had him since he was 6 months old. And he taught me so much, and actually it was kind of this really weird interplay from like observing the ex-moz at Knepp and then kind of going, but maybe I'll try this with him and just see how he goes. And it was like, he was diagnosed with navicular at 14. He suffered about 19 with terrible colic. I was getting the vet up almost weekly, and she was saying this kind of low-level colic is actually really dangerous because there will just be one occasion, it will just be the last one, and he was getting tubed, and it was such a worrying time. And as I was kind of learning this, it's like, well, he hasn't got enough diverse plant diet. He's not on a diverse plant diet. He's eating a monoculture of grasses. The really important thing is, say, most of us, we don't have the luxury of our own land, even rented. A lot of the time it's livery yards. Quite often it's on very unsuitable pastures. So we have this thing in nature recovery where you talk about grazing in a kind of improved or unimproved way. So for a farmer or for a land manager that's like wanting to feed up their animals for meat as quickly as they can, so like sheep or cattle or dairy or something like that, their goal is not the longevity of that animal and the long-term health. Their goal is to get as much nutrition and food into that animal and then take it off for meat or use it for dairy. And that's generalised because obviously there's lots of great farmers out there that are changing, and lots of regenerative agriculture which has learnt this and is changing. But in general, most of that pasture that was fertilised, rolled, really heavy management, weed killers, all of that sort of stuff, it's designed to kind of feed an animal really high nutrition. And actually, what does a horse need? It needs lots of high fibre, kind of low nutritional. It constantly eats. It's going to eat all day as it can, and spend much of the day grazing. And browsing as well. That's really, really important for a horse. So having that diverse plant diet is really important. And what that does when you're doing all that fertilising, a weed killer and rolling and everything like that, you're just basically creating a monoculture of grasses that can handle that pressure and that can respond to that fertiliser. So common one that we always talk about is things like ryegrass and clover mixes. And of course, if you've got a horse that's going to be potentially laminitic or anything like that, it's just a disaster zone. And so there's this really common sort of belief that's sort of spread through the horse sector now that it's like horses can't eat grass. Which is just a really frustrating thing because it's not a complete sentence to me. That's so too simplistic. So in the nature recovery world, when we're trying to restore like our wonderful hay meadows and species-rich grassland, we call that unimproved pasture. So it doesn't sound very good, but actually that's what you want. You want your species-rich, lots of different structure as well, and really lumpy and bumpy, because that allows all the plants to sort of develop into those little niches, areas of dry, areas of wet, and you're going to create a habitat that is really diverse, and that effectively is where your horse is going to have its best and ultimate health. So going back to Brannan, I started to realise this. I started renting my own land. I moved off the grass livery he'd always been a grass livery, but he'd just been eating the wrong thing, the same grass all the time. And actually it was always overgrazed and poached and loads of bear, so he was ingesting a lot of soil as well that potentially was causing some of that colic. And effectively moved into my own land, and up until his death last year, which was an injury and was not related to anything like that, I never had, literally it was about a month after I moved him, I never had any more colic again. And it was just like, oh right. And I know that's just one case, but there are so many things that we see this with when they're on a diverse plant diet, which is what they're intended to eat as a species. They just do so well. And I mean, there's things like at the moment, cleavers and dandelions and all sorts of things that are like willow. It's so full of nutrition. It's got things that's like anti-inflammatory, helps with their heart, helps with their sort of just diet in terms of like helps them more resistant to things like laminitis. And there's just so much to it that I think we're so simplistic. We don't teach enough about the diet. And it's just a really sort of strange world. And go back to what I said, it's like one of my things that I find is like, as I was growing up, and I adored horses, horse obsessed little kid, like I'm sure you were in it, and a lot of people listening to this. But you were just, everything you were told was trying to tell you to kind of take the horse out of the horse. and make it less of the species that it was. And I mean, if you were trying to do that with your children or a partner, you would be considered really awful for trying to change them. But we do it with a horse, and it doesn't mean we don't love them. It's just this misguided kind of, we haven't really realised that what we're doing is really inappropriate for them.
And I think the fact that they aren't different to what they were, and actually what we like you say, we're kind of brought up to think that we have to control them to keep them safe. We need to feed them these little nuts and this chopped up stuff that smells sweet and tasty and it looks like human muesli, because that's just that's what we've learned. And like you say, a lot of the practices that we do follow with horses were taken from the way that we do things with cows. Right, or with like you're saying, with herbivores that are being used for the end product. There is no end product with your horse. Even if you are going to be selling your horse, it is for the long-term health of that horse, right? So it's kind of this different way of thinking about it, of like, how can we something I come to all the time and that I talk about a lot is like, how can we keep our horses in the most species appropriate way that we can within the parameters that we have? Because like you're saying, a lot of people are on livery yards. I myself am in rented property. I have these complicated horses that come to me, so I do have some stables that we use, but can I, and the thing I'm thinking of is that's not going to change. I'm not going to have these difficult horses that come to me that I heal. But could I change the way that they have their time when they aren't in a stable, which is more of the time than when they are? We bring them in for a bit so that we can like groom them and interact with them and train them and do all these different things to help them. But in the time when we're not doing that, the rest of the day, which is more of it, 20 hours of the day, basically, if we can manage it, how could they be living in that time that could be more species appropriate, more biodiverse, more foraging, more movement, more things that their ancestors designed them to do, who they still are. They're not different. They're not their ancestors anymore. So can you tell me, go on.
No, I was going to say, I mean, it's there's so much that you can do, and that makes it really exciting. And some of it isn't immediate. It's that old proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, but if not, just plant the tree today. So there's a very obvious things. I mean, we're living with a changing climate as well, and that's a really important thing to say about horse keeping and land management. Our land isn't going to sustain the way we've kept horses for sort of how many 100 years or so, even more. And and we're also not going to be able to produce, we're talking about cereals for food, hay as well. I mean, every equestrian has had some sort of hay shortage at some point in the last few years, depending where they live. So the best thing that you can do is look after that vegetation. And by that, there's, various different systems. Equiculture is a really good one. And I think you've had Jane and Stuart, or you may know of them, that can talk about the equiculture. There are ways to kind of ease the pressure off the land. So at the moment, I've just received some funding, £5,000 worth of funding to actually help improve the environment of my land. And there are loads of schemes like this all over the country, because a lot of the charities and kind of councils and water boards and things like that, they recognise that how horses are kept is damaging the rest of our environment. So it's not necessarily everywhere, but there are grants available for this sort of thing.
I want to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors of this podcast, the Hoof School. Miri and I have been giving you updates week by week on our own Hoof School journey, and I just wanted to take a moment to remind you of what they do. The Hoof School teaches you the fundamentals of barefoot hoof health, how to read your horse's hooves, and how to safely carry out maintenance trims between farrier visits. It's practical, step-by-step learning that you can fit in around your life. Led by a hoof care professional with 15 years of experience and students all over the world, this is education you can actually trust, that answers questions that might be holding you back from the barefoot route. Listeners of This Equestrian Life can get 10% off the One Step Ahead course and Barefoot Essentials with the code TEL10 at hoofschool.com. Strong hooves start at hoofschool.com. TEL10 for 10% off. Back to the podcast.
So the immediate things that I'm doing, and I've inherited a very kind of typical overgrazed kind of traditional run 10 acres, so it's not going to be overnight that I can have all the trees I want and all the scrub and everything. But I've had some funding to be able to dig out some ponds and scrapes, which are like small areas of water. I will have to separate those for a while, let them establish with loads of aquatic vegetation and things like that. But effectively, once that's in, that will be so much amazing enrichment for my horses. To be able to get in there. I mean, aquatic plants have so many nutrients in. When I go back to my PhD species, the elk, it gets most of its year-round nutritional year-round nutrition from just eating aquatic plants, mainly in the summer, and that keeps it going all around year. And I don't know if studies have been done like that on horses, but I imagine, bearing in mind how much I see them at Knepp hanging around in a lot of our wetland and pond areas, then they're also getting those nutrients, helping their gut biome, helping all sorts of things. That's what we're talking about when we're wanting to meet the diverse plants. It's just same with us in our diets, just making them internally much healthier. Planting trees for shade, that's going to be really important, and particularly fast growing trees. There's lots of trees like willow and things like that, especially does really well next to those ponds and scrapes. But you can start to create a mini ecosystem. I think the best thing the equestrian world could do is actually look at what zoos do, because zoos have this thing where they have limited space and they have animals that need very particular environments. When you go up to places like Highland Wildlife Park, they're amazing. They go in and where there's like people working in the area, sort of cutting trees for, just generally doing that, they're taking all that browse and they're giving it to they've got Chbosky horses there, bison and elk, and they're just taking all of that browse and putting it in the field. So even if you can't grow all those trees immediately, have a chat with, a local company and see if they can provide you with some of that tree hay, which is what it traditionally would have been called. And you can just get bundles of willow and ash and all sorts of things.
Do you have to do something to it for it to be safe? I mean, I have 3 willow trees on my property right now. I know. Yeah. And the horses stop and eat them and we let them and do that sort of thing. But do we need to be doing something to it? It's not like cutting the grass in the garden and feeding it to your horse, because that is very dangerous. Do not do that. But could I literally just go to my willow tree, cut some willow and then go to the field and just put it in the field, essentially?
Yeah. You'll see the horses go as crazy as if you were to go in there with a few buckets and put them on the ground, I promise you. It really is. They're like, yes, she's finally recognised that I need to eat this stuff. It's like, it's so good for them. I mean, ash as well, and holly, thistles, so many things that they eat that they actually, cleavers at the moment, which is commonly known as the sticky willy, stuff that gets stuck to you.
Yeah.
If you get some of that and give that to your horse today, I promise you, they will just go mad for it, and just as much as a treat that you can buy in a bag.
Absolutely. You've got what's it called as well? Cow parsley.
Yeah, cow parsley.
One of the girls that used to work for me used to call it horse chocolate because they liked it so much. And even just last night, we've got a bit of a undiverse section going on outside the front of the house at the moment, where very bare ground was left. The biodiversity was basically zero, and so we've had a lot of weeds turn up because I've learned it's probably very nitrogen rich, and I'm learning all the time about all of this stuff, and it's so exciting. But my mum and I went and harvested the cow parsley because I've been given the information, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, to basically strim some of the weeds, because we've got a lot of hogweed and a lot of nettles, to maybe strim some and then overseed it. But I was like, I don't want to waste the cow parsley. So we went and harvested the cow parsley and some of the sticky weed, and we went and gave it to the horses, and they were, very pleased with their delivery of horse chocolate.
Yeah, it's just amazing when you see it, and it just makes you realise this idea of horses just eat grass, or they should, it's so wrong. But also, things like willow, you can literally cut off, it's a coppicing tree willow. It evolved around beavers, around elk, around red deer, lots of species and horses that would be eating along. And then what it does is it responds by sending up so many more shoots. You can actually cut off a piece of willow and just plant it in the ground, and it will regrow as its own willow tree. So if you've got 3 willows at the moment, you can multiply that very, very quickly. I recommend picking some from a bit further afield as well to get some genetic diversity going on your land, but effectively you can just easily. And I always try and plant some of my horses' field, and they just don't establish because the horses just gobble them up. So the best thing to do is, if you can, is let some establish in a smaller area around with tree guards or a bit of electric fencing if you use that. and let them grow up a bit and then let the horses onto them. And once they're fully established, then the horse can coppice it and it will regrow. But yeah, lots of things that you can do. I mean, the other thing is to kind of embrace stuff that maybe feels a bit wrong and have a think about that. And, you know, so one thing, for example, is how much we always flatten and roll our fields. And I think most of the time, I think from speaking with equestrians and knowing sort of my history of that kind of more traditional, is we do that because we want to avoid injury and things like that. And it probably looks nice, you know, it looks like that smart paddock. What for me that gives is a horse that then when it goes out in the real world can't really cope as well with the conditions that it's going. So generally a bridleway isn't flat straight, depending on your surface, but you know, areas that you're riding on, even surfaces of arenas sometimes, you know, they're not used to that sort of diversity under their foot. And I mean, all of my horses are barefoot, and I just find that they can sense and feel everything so much better. And I leave really big ruts, and it's up to them to sort it out. You know, I'm not, you know, I can walk across the field and I don't fall over. And this is a horse that is really stable on 4 legs, you know, and I think sometimes it's a bit like our children these days, you know, they can't go around a playground without us going, oh, careful, careful. And I think it's a culture that has kind of developed. And what I will say of the changing climate, again, this resilience, is if you do start to get really lumpy, bumpy land, you'll get areas of shade that weren't there before, just where the land is sort of caving in places. You'll get different levels of hydrology, you'll get different minerals brought up as well, and plants can help you do that. The more taller plants you have, generally the more established their root system, so they help draw up kind of water and minerals, and also the diversity of bacteria and things that are in the soil that actually are helpful and beneficial as well. So there's lots of kind of just, I think if I can have a general kind of idea, if you're not sure, it's like diversity. You know, like if you're not sure, go with the more diverse. If you've got something that's a bit monoculture, like it's completely flat, or, you know, not enough surfaces. I mean, that's something I'm really keen on as well. We've got an area of wood chip for our horses. I'm actually, some of the funding that I've got for my grant is going to go towards a small area of limestone hard standing that I can hay on, because clay is a nightmare to hay on. But in the winter, I can, on the worst, wettest times, I can keep them in a larger area of an area of hard standing and wood chip, so they're a little bit more less damaging to the land as well, and not poaching it up as much. So yeah, lots of things like that, and embrace little critters. So things like wasps, which we all don't really love that much. If you've ever watched a wasp attack a horsefly, it's very entertaining. So basically, wasps predate on horseflies.
You sadist.
Yeah, I know. But effectively, like, we put on all that, you know, fly masks and rugs and everything like that, and we've killed off, through our kind of chemicals and our monoculture of land, we've killed off all the predators. So things like dragonflies, the wasps, spiders, all of these things will eat your horseflies. So if you can encourage, again, diversity of lands, of plants and soil structure and hydrology and all that sort of stuff, you'll end up with a more diverse insects and invertebrates, and that will end up with less horseflies. So that is a good win as well.
That is a good win. That is important. How can we have less horseflies, more insects that don't bother the horses? And it's interesting. I was reading something. Was it you and I that spoke about it? Something to do with starlings, and where you see starlings, where there's and that's. Can you talk a bit about birds as well, because they play a very important role in the biodiversity?
Yeah. So I have another 10 acres that I have in a different area that I use as kind of fallback land, because it doesn't have any facilities and things, so it's not the easiest to have my horses, but we have an amazing population of starlings there. And I have, if you want to have a look at this, some of my Instagram stories and pit reels on there have shown this, but we've effectively had huge sort of flocks of starlings, and they're all sitting on my horse's back, and they're just eating all the flies. And I'll get up there and there'll be like lots of little bits of bird poo on the back. And particularly my old boy, he was 16-1. So he was like an incredible ledge for a starling. You know, they would just, on him particularly, they'd be like, and he was quite, you know how horses, when they get a bit older, they get a bit high withered and things. So he had a great sort of back for them to be on. And, you know, the starlings were just munching everything up. So some of the birds in our landscapes, you know, they're helping us also parasite. So I think that's something, you know, to talk about that's really important is going to more of like a worm count situation, so you're not having to give chemical wormers. And that's kind of twofold, because it's really bad for the environment. There's all sorts of things like ivermectins in there that can kill our invertebrates. But equally, it's not very good for the gut biome of the horse to be given the wormers. And obviously, sometimes it's essential, and so there's absolute essential use on occasion. But if you can avoid it for most part, or for those things that you can cope with low levels of worms with, what you'll find is increased, again, invertebrates and increased birds will just help keep those parasites really, really low. We've got amazing dung beetles, for instance, at Knepp, and a lot of the time the dung beetles, they're also eating things off the dung. So you get dung beetles that actually want the dung itself, and then you get dung beetles and other insects that come to the dung to predate on things like your fly larvae again, and all sorts of other stuff, and your parasites and worms. If you're lucky enough to have like jackdaws and crows around, they're quite often vilified, but they are great at spreading your poo around and helping eat up all those little parasites. So your worm burdens are reduced as well. I mean, I've not had to worm for quite a few years now with mine, apart from, each year you do encysted redworm and things like that. But other than that, I've not really had to do any kind of worm as a result. So that's been really great as well.
It's amazing to hear that. And it's so important to understand, like, this it's all a part of it, right? Like, it's all a part of this biodiversity. Like, there are places now, and this episode is sponsored actually by Westgate.
Oh,
so they have, they are. We have a little. There'll be an advert in this episode about them, but they've got a rewilding project themselves near their lab. They've got this whole patch of land, and they're doing all their own learning about diversifying grasses and all this biodiversity. And I think it's important to understand, like, all of us, even if you've only got one horse on a livery yard, we can be like an instigator of change. And I know that sometimes can be really scary, but if you're listening to this and you're thinking, we just do this and we just worm, blanket worming, like, you can change that. If you get a group of you together and you take some science to your livery yard, that's the key. Like, it's science. It's not just, we're not just saying it because it's fun, basically. And it's so interesting to remember that the ivermectin that we put in our horses, so like if you do an encysted redworm, that you need to do once a year, that then you keep the horse in for 48 hours, you keep them off the pasture so that you can control that shed, because it's something like 90%, I think it is. Sorry, Westgate, if I got that wrong. But 90% of the ivermectin of that chemical goes basically straight through your horse and into the ground, and then it's being absorbed by all those tiny little beasts that we so need.
More parasites, because the ones that you're killing aren't eating the ones that are left tend to be these ones that are more resilient, and that's why we end up in places where you've got huge numbers of flies and things like that. And ticks and all that sort of stuff, because they're not getting predated on. I mean, nature is, we all know this from David Attenborough, nature is an ecosystem. It's all about these incredible levels of predation and, and how they interact with one another. And I think what we've done and what I've observed is we've very much over time, including humans and ourselves, is we've started to kind of disconnect, and that has spread into our domesticated animals. So we could talk about dogs, we could talk about cats, things like that. There's so many things that we've kind of taken away and made too simplified, and also just kind of, affected. So once we start to go back to that connection to that ecosystem and being part of nature, and and actually there's been huge interest of this from the equestrian industry. So I gave a talk, I think it was a couple of years ago now, to the National Equine Welfare Council, which is a consortium of lots of different organisations and charities, associations, that are all together working to improve equine welfare in Britain. And I gave a talk which was basically horses and nature, what we can learn from rewilding for our domesticated horses. And while I was there, I had somebody in the audience from World Horse Welfare, and they said, could you do a talk for all of our staff? And actually World Horse Welfare and charities like Donkey Sanctuary are doing incredible things for their horses to live more naturalistic lives. And they're seeing, this is the other thing we haven't really talked about, but you save so much money. It is so, I run my horses, I have 3 horses, they cost me probably a couple of £100 a month. Compared to, I know livery, I'm renting, so it's slightly different, and I have a couple of liveries and sharers, but I don't spend out on lots of expensive feed or equipment or fertilizer or contractors to roll land, or, you know, there's so much that I save on shoes and, you know, various things. So it's actually incredibly cheap as well. So one hand is to do it for the welfare and how the industry does to be shaping this, but also it's to make it much more affordable for each person, really, and livery yards as well. You know, they are struggling with rising costs and passing that on to livery clients and things. So if there's a way to kind of reduce, which this does, that's also very exciting.
That's really interesting, and it's so important to make it attainable. You know, why is this relevant? You know, why is this relevant to the everyday equestrian? And it is relevant because, yes, a lot of people will be struggling to pay their livery bills, and the livery bills are going up. I know that, you know, we had such an unbelievable, you know, I think somebody I was talking to the other day said that it was something on near a 40% reduction in hay yield last year, and it's looking like it's going to be even worse this year. So we're relying, but then we're also relying more on the hay because we've all got less grass. Because of the climate.
Of the grass. You know, frightened of putting horses on that rich grass and having laminitic issues and things like that. So it's a really,
and the grass being so overdone, you know, because the grass, you know, like our grass here is incredibly stressed at this very moment in time, and I'm thinking, how fast can I get Rina here to help me and guide me a bit, because I kind of hoped I'd set it up really well, but then actually in reality the grass just it's very aggravated by the horses being on it. It was empty for 5 years, and so then the horses have eaten it, and it's just it's like it's just gone. And I'm like, okay. And then we've had 6 weeks of no rain in the middle of March, which has been very difficult. Can you talk to us a bit about, you know, does the land become more resilient if it is more diverse, and what do we need to be doing, I suppose, other than like you were saying about maybe planting some trees, but are there ways of like using the land, like dividing it up, that are a bit more tangible?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of different measures that work really well. So I've talked about equiculture already. That's about having a kind of hard standing or some sort of surfaced area where you can keep the horses and then they access a rotation of areas of land. And a lot of that is about having them walking between troughs and what they call the loafing area, which is that area that you keep them off, and out to the various different areas. So sometimes just being able to reduce the pressure, and that's what I'm kind of emulating with mine. It's a slightly varied approach to it, but I'm effectively going to have this system where they can rotate around my different field sections, and I move those about as well. And I also don't have what I call winter or summer grazing, which I think is very common in horse world. And I think probably what we do most is us as humans, and we do it across our lives, but is categorise things and have them in boxes. And it's very hard to break out of that. And having winter and summer grazing just doesn't apply to our climate anymore. You know, we're having warm, wet winters. We're having dry periods of spring, you know, the opposite sometimes. It's more about being reactive to, or adaptive probably is the best word, for the environment that we're having and the conditions we're having. So we're about to go into a really hot week. It's sort of coming up to the end of May here, and you know, temperatures are going to get up to 30 odd degrees this week, I've been told, here in Sussex. So I have separated an area of my field for the last couple of weeks while we've had a bit of rain and there's been a pulse, which has got loads and loads of shade. And now what I will do is move, and it's only really a triangle for them, but it's attached to another area which they're able to get in, and therefore they've got ample space, but they've got this really, really shaded, longer grass and diverse area. So it's just about thinking about that. You know, I have a really wet field, which I think traditionally you'd call it your summer field because it's too wet in winter. But if you're having a really dry winter, give it a graze. One of the most amazing things about grass is it's actually stimulated by enzymes in herbivores' mouths. So I know. And as they're grazing and moving about, they're actually stimulating growth of the plants, and that combined with your photosynthesis and, you know, everything else going on, your soil conditions, that is helping your grass and other plant species to grow. And just like we said about the willows earlier, they respond to herbivory. So, you know, there's a very cool thing with a holly plant. If you ever see a holly tree, which are a bit rarer because they're quite often in hedgerows, but if you see a holly tree, if you look up to the top of the tree, the leaves are really smooth, and at the bottom, the leaves are really thorny. This is because they've evolved around herbivores, so they create more thorn where herbivores eat. And where they're at the top of the tree, where there's not many big herbivores anymore, they just don't bother putting the effort into the thorn. So you have a holly leaf at the top of the tree that looks completely different to the opposite. So everything in our environment interacts with the animals that are in it. And I think that's been quite carefully taken out of the agenda with a lot of our science lessons at school and things like that. It's all about, sun and water and, and literally that's it. And then the more robust your soil is probably the next thing.
We'll go on to soil. I'm very interested to hear about the soil, but I've got to tell you, I literally spoke to my parents about this last night around the dinner table. We were talking about this conversation we were about to have, and the irony of the situation is I wrote my very unsuccessful A-level coursework on ivy. No, holly.
Holly, yeah.
Spiky at the bottom, not spiky at the top.
Yeah, brilliant.
And it was ungraded. It was terrible, my coursework, because I was so passionately dyslexic throughout my A-levels, and I was very let down by one of my biology teachers. He just couldn't find the way to help to get it to me to the place I needed to get to. But once upon a time I was learning about this. I just didn't know that I was learning about it, if you know what I mean. And so it's so interesting now to have these conversations again, and to be so, I have always been passionate about this stuff, to hear you say like it's because of herbivores and that we don't have big enough herbivores to warrant the holly bush being spiky all the way up is just like, I'm like,
brilliant,
I've been learning about this even since I was 17, And it's, so do you think when we have the moose reintroduced, the holly trees will become spiky all the way up?
Possibly higher. I think have you seen as well with horses, they will, if you've got oak trees on your land, they quite often rear up, and I have this with my horses to actually eat oak leaves. So I think with various trees, they used to have the mammoth, they used to have, all sorts of big species in our landscape that were eating much. And so the moose, yes, it will be much taller, and a lot of our trees will respond to that. And the best thing about it, this is going back to Knepp and rewilding, this is the nutshell of rewilding, is you're basically giving the chance for various species and interactions to interact again. And it's what kind of we've disrupted with the way that we've managed land in general. Obviously not everywhere, but in general we've disrupted that. And so how we talk about it in rewilding is restoring natural processes. And also sometimes we drop in ecosystem function, which is about kind of having those functions like water, like the plants, the vegetation, everything working again in the ecosystem. So, you could say again, how does this apply? I've got 5 acres, or, how does this apply? It is a win-win-win, because effectively you're restoring that environment. Your horse is happier and healthier for all the reasons we've discussed. Your land is healthier and more resilient, which means that from a changing climate point of view, you're actually building up your resilience as a land manager as well. And again, you're going to be saving that money, because it does require less input and again less expense and all the supplements and feeds and everything else that you've been doing. It is, and there are, if anybody's interested, there are books on this that are just fantastic. So there's Fred Provenza, who's this American scientist, and he's written a book called Nourishment, and it's all about plant interactions with herbivores. Cindy Engel, that is a book called Wild Health. That's about 20 years old now, but it's just such an incredible book. It talks about a lot of the kind of properties of plants and even soil. We said about soil again, how good that can be for an animal as well. So there's so many things that we just need to relearn. And actually a lot of what I guess I found over the it's been 13 or so years now working in nature recovery as opposed to that commercial sector. I've learned a lot, but I've also unlearned a lot. That's kind of almost as important as what I've learned has been this great unlearning that I've had to do from all these belief systems that I had in place about horses particularly, but also other, factors of my life. And that's just been brilliant, really.
The great unlearning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I think there's a lot of the kind of the way we used to do things that just get lost by the need for manufactured volume. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I definitely struggle with. There's kind of a sweet spot for me in terms of number of horses, in terms of literal financial revenue. Like, I have to
Yeah.
be realistic
Yeah.
about that. And if you were to come over, which please, let's try
Yeah, I'd love
and do
to.
that,
Yeah.
I would love that so much. You know, that is something that has to be a factor for me. So I'm thinking, like,
Mm,
this equicentral system is very good, but it does require a lot of rested land. And do I need to have a system, maybe a track, where I am sort of taking away some of the grazing land as such, and but creating a system of movement that still
yeah.
allows the horses to get a lot of movement while using less space,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah, so you can use the track as a way to take out to different pastures as well. So what I'm in the process of setting up with my land as I get this funding and the grant is trackways that lead to bigger paddocks or areas. But there's something about the resilience of the land, and again, it's like as you get that vegetation to grow, and a track system's brilliant for resting land because what you can end up with is an area of land that's actually your hay for winter. And hay cut, the reason hay cuts are really successful for nature recovery, and we've lost, I can't remember the exact figure, it's over 90% of our hay meadows, in Britain have been lost. And these hay meadows are really diverse species of plants, so either herbaceous sort of plants or they're grasses, so mixed species. And by doing kind of quite late cuts on hay cutting areas, you're actually mimicking that idea of a herbivore kind of coming through, doing what your horses, you've said, have been doing, which is grazing all that rested vegetation, and then they're moving on, and we're having to mimic that. And there's lots of benefits to track systems for obviously things like their hooves, their diet. They have evolved for a lot part very different habitats, and you have horses that are resilient in places like Namibia, like I mentioned earlier, where they're not getting the same as our kind of Sussex temperate vegetation, massive amounts of vegetation that's growing. So horses are really highly adaptable to stuff like that as well. But if you can create your hay paddocks or hay meadows within your track system, that's also very successful. Or you can just use it as standing hay. So there's a term called foggage that was well known in the past, which is basically standing hay. And what I mean by that is letting your grasses and your plants grow through, your herb layer particularly, grow through their growing season. One of the biggest challenges why ryegrass does so well is because it responds to quite heavy grazing. And a lot of our more ancient grasses that are better for horses nutritionally, they don't get a chance to go through their full cycle. If you think how many of your normal horse paddocks do you see in flower, grasses in flower, it's very rare. They're generally staying that really short grass, and that's affecting both the soil structure underneath as it's getting very, very small roots. But also you're losing the ability for those more ancient species to be able to reseed. And be pollinated and have that genetic diversity of them as well. So having a track system, I believe, actually works really well. And you'll get loads of like really cool mining bees and other burying insects and various things on your kind of bit of bare earth by the track. So it's actually not the end of the world to have lots of area of bare ground, because there's a whole load of animals, basically invertebrates, that have adapted to be sort of to make a home in that bare ground. Which is also very cool.
That is incredibly cool. And I feel like this is just like a kind of, you're just a fountain of knowledge, Rina, and I think one that is wonderful and very inspirational to talk with, to have this kind of open conversation. And I know we haven't really spoken like that deeply about the ponies at Knepp, and I wanted just to touch on that before we close up. But is there anything that you have really learned from those wild ponies that you didn't learn studying other herbivores, or you didn't learn, is there anything really special about ponies that, makes it, that's relevant, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, so that's one thing I haven't mentioned, is that just coming to see them is eye-opening. So when I started getting more enthralled with these wild herbivores at Knepp, I would arrive to work 2 or 3 hours early. A lot of this was pre my children, actually, because it's now harder to arrive 2 or 3 hours early to work. But I would and I still, as much as I can, spend time just observing them. And I think the most exciting thing is those relationships they have with each other. Their social bonds are so strong. And horses, and it's very difficult, I really appreciate the work you're doing. You're bringing in different horses that don't know each other, and it can be really challenging. But they have really strong matriarchal systems. So effectively, they are living in usually all female groups with generally one male, so one male stallion. There has been research to see that in places where there's high predator numbers, so again like Venezuela and places like that, the stallions accept like a less dominant male as well. So they also accept like a second stallion because it helps them with that safety element around predators. And then they have their youngsters, and their youngsters are there until they disperse naturally. And you know, things like weaning, it's much later than 6 months. I mean, we have both colts and fillies that are still suckling in their second year. And I think it's eye-opening to understand that actually how much we disrupt those natural relationships. So you can't mimic that unless you run maybe a breeding stud or something like that. It's very hard to mimic that in your environment. But what I would say is be really considerate of their social networks. We always hear my horse is clingy, or I can't put it out with that horse because it's too close. And I think we need to rethink about that. And imagine it was your little child telling you, you know, that I really want to be with this horse or something like that, you know, this other person. It's their social networks are really strong and really important. And I think that's when I watch them, and what I've learned about horses is that sort of friends and freedom is the only way to make them happy, allowing them to work together as a herd. If you've got horses moving in and out because you run a livery yard or because you're buying and selling or training, then, you know, there are things you can do. You can make sure they've always got close to another horse, so you're not isolating them in an area, you know, for longer than you maybe have to if there's any biosecurity reasons. But effectively, it's just letting them have those friendships and letting them be a horse, you know. And it's something, you know, I said I've got 3 horses now that I ride, and it's something, you know, I'm barefoot, I'm mainly bitless. I'm actually trying to find the perfect bitless bridle for my Highland because he has a very chunky face, so that's taken a bit longer. But I pretty much ride now, and the way I ride reflects that they're a horse. I don't over control how they're ridden, apart from a safety and kind of where I need to have a kind of, you know, a bit of authority, like riding on a road or something like that for safety. But other than that, I try and let them be a horse as much as possible. And I think, yeah, all of that has come from just observing the really tight herd networks and the way that the horses move through the land. We do wild horse safaris at Knepp as well, I should say. So if anybody wants to come along, there's lots of public footpaths and permissive footpaths that they can go on and free of charge and just have a walk around. There's, you know, so you can go and have a chance to see them. But if you want a kind of almost guaranteed chance to have a look at the Exmoors and observe their behaviour, you know, we've got stallion in at the moment, so it's a really exciting time watching all those interactions. That is what I really recommend doing.
It's funny, my friends and I had already planned a visit to Knepp for my birthday. My birthday's passed, but we think we're going to come at the end of June. I think you've got a safari at the end of June. And I was thinking, I was like, I feel like I just want to go behind the scenes with Rina now. I'm like, but it sounds like you get to go and you get to have the whole experience. So you mentioned just now, we've been talking for a while, so we probably need to stop soon, but you mentioned that you have a stallion there at the moment. So I guess because of the fence as such, the thing we spoke about right at the beginning, you can't have an uncontrolled breeding program as such because they would essentially overrun, and that would be...
Yeah, so I think one of the misconceptions about rewilding is that you're just abandonment and you're just going, here you go, animals, go and fend for yourself. And that's just simply not true. We're still obliged by law, and because we want to, I should say, is to fulfil all British law, welfare, identification, management in terms of anything that is set in legislation and policy. So I actually sit on a steering group of something called the Large Heifer Working Group, where we're actually looking at making some of our laws and our policies more fit for purpose for rewilding, because there's actually some occurrences where we feel they go against the welfare of a rewilded horse. But a good example is actually managing the breeding of the horses. So you're right, we can't just go, you know, here's the colts, here's the stallions, you know, mares, they're all breeding and we don't have any hand in it. So we tend to, particularly with Exmoors, they saw a real bottleneck after the Second World War. So we need to make sure that we're careful about what genetic breeding we're doing. And so we work with, you know, Exmoor Pony Society and others to try and help make sure that we're matching up the best stallions. It's one of those things that I say compromise is really important. In an ideal world, the mare herd would have full selection process for the stallion. There's an amazing book called Horses in Company by Lucy Rees, which it's like the Bible of all of this stuff. It's so important to read. But she talks about how there's been studies to show that even when stallions, we get this image of them fighting and they fight to the death and it's the strongest one that wins. Even when a stronger, younger horse wins, mares will return to the older stallion because he's their partner and they have chosen him, and they haven't chosen. And actually they don't like the aggressive ones, the more aggressive ones, because ultimately you're parenting all year round with this stallion. Why would you want an aggressive partner? And it's something we should all learn in life. But you're going to choose the better parent for your foals. So it's actually part of that is to learn. So that's an unfortunate thing about rewilding for us, is that we're being a bit more like, here's your stallion, as opposed to letting those natural systems take place. But it does mean that we can help with the genetic diversity. It also means we've got about 40 to 50 horse riders at Knepp that use the areas regularly. And in the past, we've had some challenges, some of the young colts particularly, and with stallions, about them being a bit amorous towards horse riders. Part of that is a bit of education and learning. People have got very close, or maybe, sort of repeatedly done visits to them and things like that. But effectively, we feel that we've still got a bit of learning, and there's projects across Europe where people are successfully riding with these really rewilded herds with stallions in all year round and colts. So we know it's not something that can't be done, but it is something that we still have a bit of learning to do about how we do it. But effectively, we put in the stallion for normally 6 weeks of the during this time of year, and then that means we have foals. And actually, one of the reasons we do that isn't just to have the lovely foals, but because the breeding changes their behaviour. So we get them more likely to move. We get the dung patterns change as well. So when they and things like that when they're breeding, stallions do something called stud piles, which are basically create piles of poo in one area. And they will outcompete each other to be the more sort of successful male. It's probably actually more successful than being an aggressive stallion, is being a stallion that can poo lots, because it shows you've got a really healthy digestive system. So again, this is kind of all these nuances and etiquette of how horses select their mates.
That's amazing.
So that's quite a funny one. And you see the little colts learning it as well.
Really?
Yeah,
my husband's poo pile's the biggest of all. Yeah. Such a weird one. That's amazing. Because I've seen, obviously, stallions do that. You see them in a stable, they'll poo all in one place. Yeah. And I've just thought they were, tidy. But that's so interesting. Gosh.
Yeah, they also urinate on females' poo, which we think is like a territorial thing. So it's kind of, if I wee on this one, then the next stallion that comes along will know that she's already with a stallion. Yeah, so there's a lot to it, and it's great to observe and learn from.
Amazing. Gosh, I'm so excited to come. I'm going to go and book my horse safari straight away. Rina, I have one question that I ask everybody, and it is I'm really interested to hear your take on it, because I don't think it's going to be from the same angle that everybody else's is. But the question is, if you had one thing that you could say to every equestrian and they had to listen, like they had to kind of do the thing that you were saying, what would that one thing be?
I mean, I think we've touched on this a lot, really, but it is something that's really important for me, is let your horse be a horse and learn what a horse is. It's not something perhaps you can find in a kind of traditional manual of how to keep horses. It's something that you have to go out and watch horses in the wild areas, like places like Knepp. Observe how they are with their field companions, and let them interact with the environment. So make that environment as stimulating as possible with all the features and bumpiness and different plants that we talked about. Let them be a horse, because I think, the reward will be you'll have a happier, healthier horse. It's not only cheaper, but you'll have a better relationship with that horse. And, you can actually just enjoy that, knowing that they're living their best life. And I think that is if I could ask anybody, is, you can't change things overnight. Like we've talked about, there can be various constraints. But perhaps if you just put that lens on, so even if you have to do something because it's the way your livery yard does it, but just that awareness and having conversations, the more conversations we have like this and people listen, the more likely we can help improve the welfare of all the domesticated horses that are here today. And that is, I sort of do this on the side as such, talking more about horses and how it applies, as opposed to my work in nature recovery. But it's so interlinked. It's just, it flows really well. And So yeah, if I could get everyone listening, I'd say let your horse be a horse and learn what that means.
Oh, thank you, Rina. I just think this is so inspirational and powerful and important. And that's why we have this podcast to have these conversations, because, you know, I am today going to go to my willow trees and I'm going to cut down some willow and I'm going to go and put it in my horses' fields that aren't perfect right now, because that's what I can do right now. And it's that kind of a conversation, you know, what can you do right now? You know, we have these amazing bridle paths near us that haven't been used in years, and they're pretty wild, like they're quite overgrown in places. And I'm letting the horses do the trimming. I take them.
Perfect.
And we
Herbals.
stop, and they eat the hedges, and they're having a lovely time. So I'm thinking, okay, these are some small things that I can be doing to encourage some biodiversity in my horse's diet, to look after the land a little bit, and to sort of start understanding a bit better. So that's brilliant. Could you maybe just say where people can get in touch with you, so that if people are interested in, you know, a livery yard wants to change things, you know, how can you help? Where can they find you?
I'm on most social media, so sort of LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram as Rina Quinlan, so they can just hopefully search that and find it. I have a website, rinaquinlan.com, but I would also point to the Knepp estate. There is so many resources on their website as well, and lots more information about our Exmoor herds there, and details of course of the safaris as well. So and there's lots of other really cool safaris, so you don't just have to come on a wild horse one, you can come and do, you know, dusk and dawn safaris, bat and moth, all sorts of really cool things. So yeah, do come and visit.
Amazing. Thank you, Rina. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.